So I spent a month playing Star Wars: The Old Republic. I'm not really sure how I'm gonna start calling these videos. I feel like it's so I spent X amount of time. But either way, I decided to jump back and play some old SWTOR. It's a game I enjoyed quite a bit. And if you guys follow me over on Twitter, you'll find that I had legendary player status, which isn't like a crazy thing to do. It's just a time investment. It's something that a lot of players recommend, getting done at some point. But essentially all it means is that I played all of the 8 base classes and played all of their storylines all the way to completion. And much like my Soul Worker video, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an idea of my journey and my thoughts on the game itself and how I feel about it after all these years. Because, dear God, SWTOR is it is an old game. It is years old. I want to say at the time of me recording this, it's coming up on its like 7th anniversary. Actually, I'm going to fact check that one sec. Correction, it's 10th anniversary. It is almost 10 years old. It came out December 20th of 2011. Absolutely insane. So anyway, I'll give you guys an idea of my journey as I go through this. Now, in case any of you guys aren't looking for spoilers or anything along those lines, I do try to keep spoilers to a minimum. There are some recordings, a few things of some storyline stuff, just so you guys can see some dialogue, as well as a just mostly a Flashpoint I ran. I believe it was mostly Directive 7 that I ran. It is a story mode Flashpoint, but it's kind of like a self-contained story, so it's nothing too crazy. Flashpoints are the dungeons in the game. So to give you guys a brief history of my time playing SWTOR, I originally jumped into this game way back around the time it came out, sometime between the 2011, 2013 era time frame. I don't remember exactly when it was when I originally first started playing, but it was one of the first MMOs I really got into, actually. Funny enough, it was my time frame transitioning from being a console-only player to a PC player. And I remember this so vividly because SWTOR was one of the first games I ever realized I could use a program called Xpatter and map controller buttons to keybind presses. And I played it fully with a controller at all times. That means raiding, PvPing, everything I played with a controller. And to be honest, I did pretty decent. I wasn't like, top 5, top 10, whatever, fantastic, but I held my own pretty well. And for anyone who's playing the game currently, you guys know that there's a way of doing this now with Steam, and they have a way of setting up controllers and things of that sort, but this was before that even happened. So kind of cool that you're able to do this, and you still are actually technically able to do this when you use the program Xpatter. So it works for other games as well. Just be very creative on how you set up your buttons. History lesson aside, I originally played a Sith assassin way back in the double-sided lightsaber. Fan of the whole Darth Maul thing. It was pretty dope. Ran through its storyline, enjoyed it, and really kind of got bored of the stealth style. And then, double back, went and played a Marauder instead. Played the warrior storyline. Used everything I learned the leveling process to make my next leveling process so that much more comfy. PvP and all that stuff going all the way up. Because if you guys remember way back then, PvP, you were able to gather currency for PvP as you were leveling with the lower level PvP brackets and use that on your higher level characters. So I was able to gear out characters while leveling them, actually, doing PvP. And originally you used this to supplement your experience because just doing the story back then didn't give you enough experience to level up to the next area. You really had to do all the side quests or do flashpoints and to supplement the amount of experience you really needed overall. So that was me back then. Playing PvP, doing storylines, really only did like 2 of them, honestly. And then eventually, got tired and left the game. Made some friends along the way. Some friends I still know to this day, actually. 2 of them ended up getting married, which is kind of crazy. It was the old healer tank combo, which is kind of funny to think about now. Nowadays with current memes when it comes to playing MMOs, but it worked out. It's a thing. It happened back then. I have multiple friends that have had this happen realistically in other games as well, not just SWTOR. But enough with the history lesson. How was it going through all of this process now? What did I decide to do? So I ended up getting rid of every single character I had except for one. I kept my old Marauder. So that's right, my son was gone. He was already gone by the time I came back to the game. But every character I had, I ended up getting rid of, except my Marauder. Moved him over to Starforge, where it seemed like the most player base was, and started slowly building up a new set of characters. Now, I wanted to play every single storyline from the beginning. Even if I had played it beforehand, I wanted to play every single one of them. So what I did was I created mirror characters. I was a fan of the Sith Marauder, so I made a Sentinel. I also, of course, made a mercenary and made a commando. Made a operative, so then made a smuggler, and finally I ended up going with, what was the last one? Oh yeah, assassin and shadow. So Had a good time going through the storylines, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how the leveling process is now as opposed to what it was like way back when I originally played. So first off, I did subscribe. The subscription status in SWTOR is actually really good. Just by subscribing to the game, not only are you getting yourself a boosting experience, but you actually immediately unlock all of the expansions. So I didn't have to go back to the game and then buy a bunch of expansions. I got them just for subbing to the game, which was the usual 15 bucks. But you got a ton of content. They also do have a cash shop in the game technically, but you get currency for the cash shop by just subscribing every month. There's also achievements in game that give you currency for this cash shop, and a lot of times most of the items that you get from that cash shop are purchasable in game as well, which does kind of fuck around with the economy a little bit, but realistically players are able to kind of balance that out back and forth, and you can't just fully pay to win your way to victory. You do stuff to do some things in game that will make it a bit more difficult. So if you want to go free to play, you absolutely can. I recommend at least spending enough money to do one subscription because that makes you a preferred player, which gains you some benefits, as well as unlocking all the expansions. So that, in my opinion, is definitely worth it. But for me, I knew I was going to spend at least a month in the game, so I said, you know what, let's go ahead and sub and see how things go. The leveling process is pretty streamlined based on what I originally experienced. You gain a lot more experience and you don't really have to do a bunch of side quests. Unless you just really want to, you can do the main storyline quest and get all the experience you needed. However, I did have a few advantages. Number one is being subscribed does give you an experience bonus. The second one being joining a guild, and that was really about all the experience buffs I actually got through the leveling process. There was no events going on or anything along those lines. You did get experience buffs while you're going through the story, and technically I went through the story so fast, or fast enough, and kept consistent that I had an experience buff up the entire time. So you could pop experience buff for a couple of hours, keep playing, and then realistically by the time I finished, I still had 2 or 3 left over, which was kind of cool that, you know, I never really ran out. Though I feel like if you take your time or if you tend to like AFK a lot, you probably would have ran out of experience buffs eventually. The leveling process, like I mentioned, was just going through the story. There are a few story-related flashpoints you also really want to hit up. Those gave me enough of an experience point boost that I never really had to worry about doing the stories of the actual planets. Every planet has its own individual story that you can go through. Things like Drum and Koss dealing with the Revenites, so on and so forth. So you really have a storyline that you're able to jump into and experience for the planet as well as the character storyline. Now, the planet storyline is something that you can do as a group, where the character storyline is more specific to you. That was one thing I actually really enjoyed about SWTOR back in the day is you could play with your friends. You didn't have to play alone. Even going through the story, that was part of your experience. So let's say I'm playing a Sith warrior and my friend's playing a bounty hunter. Well, first off, our starting planets are different, so we would have to do our starting planets on our own, or maybe one of us would complete it, join the other one on the other planet. Actually, I don't think that'd even work, because you don't have access to a starship until after you complete Drum and Koss, but either way, you'd have to wait until the two of you guys come together to then do storylines together. Or if, say, I played through the game more than my friend did, I could go back to where he was and get level synced down, because the planets have level syncing, which is super cool, and go through his story with him. However, when he is going through his main story, I don't get to interact with any of the actual characters. I can, show up, watch the cutscenes with him, watch him do his dialogue choices, and even I think get some social points. I'm not sure if that actually is a thing or not still, but I can even get some social points for just being along for the ride with him. Really quickly, I'll just mention what social points are, but basically they are points you get for making dialogue choices in storylines or in cutscenes in general. You've got the old BioWare style. If you've ever played Mass Effect or any of those games where you have a choice system where you can actually choose different options. Sometimes it affects your morality and things of that sort, but you can make those decisions. And in group content where multiple people can respond, they actually roll a dice where you pick a response, someone else picks their response, and it rolls a dice, and whoever gets the higher number, their response is what plays out. However, whatever your choice would have provided you, you still get the benefits of. So let's say, for example, we're doing a group piece of content where someone needs to decide if we're going to be killing off these guys in an evil way or if we're going to decide to spare them for good boy points. Now, I can choose to get my good boy points and choose to spare them, and then my friend can choose to kill them if he wants to, and it rolls a dice, and whatever actually ends up being the higher number, so say he rolls and he wins, that's what plays out. He kills them. However, I still got my good boy points. I didn't lose my good boy points because he won. But we still get the response that happened because he rolled the higher number, which I think is really cool and a fun way of doing that process. And going through things like that in a group gets you those social points. Those social points kind of work like a in a form of what is it called, reputation in an MMO, where there's some vendors on each of the planets that you can get some specialized fashion for. So nothing too crazy. It's not like it's super in depth or intuitive, so that you absolutely need to work through. It's just a little extra reward that's, you know, rewards you for playing with friends or with individuals in general. Now, the story content can be 100% soloed. I actually went through everything solo on my end. I occasionally joined others, you know, randomly for other flashpoints or anything along those lines, but I actually did every single flashpoint solo. They do have a story mode version, which is intended for you to be able to solo. Technically, even veteran flashpoints you can kind of solo. They have different tiers, so you have story, veteran, and master mode. The story mode flashpoints are intended 100% to be soloed. They give you a extra NPC that's supposed to be kind of like your god mode NPC. He tanks for you, he heals you when you get low on HP. Damage really isn't what he's there for. It's kind of like your job, but realistically, he's just there to make sure that you always get through all of the enemies that are there listed. Veteran flashpoints are kind of the game's way of saying, hey, look, you can go in there with just 4 people. They don't have to have any specific roles, but you know, whoever's there will be able to complete the content. And then, of course, master mode flashpoints are more of like your traditional tank healer DPS rule, where you have 2 DPS, a healer and a tank. Tank has to hold aggro, healer has to kill the group, and DPS have to kill the enemies. Sort of, you know, dungeon run, but you'd be more accustomed to playing your standard MMO nowadays. Now, all of that to wrap back down to the leveling process. Leveling was not too bad. You realistically got all of the gear you needed through the leveling process itself. You didn't really hurt for any gear or experience. You could just take what you got through leveling and you're good to go. However, if you're someone who likes to tailor your experience a little bit more, like you like to mess around with your gear, gearing has these types of, or it's hard to explain exactly, but gear, you're able to purchase gear itself in the form of shells, and these shells you can actually add in different portions or pieces to boost your gear up. Every piece of gear basically has a breakdown of stats, and those stats are based on 3 individual pieces inside of that gear: a armoring, a mod, and an enhancement. Now, those combined together give you the stats of the gear itself. What you're able to do from the very beginning is you actually can go to the fleet, which is kind of like the hub for each of the individual factions. Of course, Republic and Empire, Republic and Imperial. Well, you can go to the fleet and you can get a shell that you can put your own armorings, mods, and enhancements in. And there's a vendor on every single planet that has the armorings, mods, and enhancements of the level of that planet itself. So as you're going through, you're able to pick up armorings, mods, and enhancements to upgrade your gear and not have to worry about getting gear from all of your individual storylines or anything along those lines. You can just sell all of that gear or disenchant it or whatever you happen to want to do with the gear as you get it. Now, there's a meta way of doing it, like, you know, getting only certain upgrades at certain times, so on and so forth. But realistically, you don't have to think about it. You can just get the level of the gear that you're at and then keep going forward, and just slotting in, of course, your armorings, mods, and enhancements as you go along. I can go into like more detail in another video if you guys absolutely want me to, but I don't really want to get on the whole how to gear process as you're leveling. It's very, not convoluted. It's actually very straightforward, but it takes a bit of explaining that I don't want to really go into this video, as it's already going to be long enough as it is. There is, of course, a fashion system in the game itself, which you guys know I jumped into and made my characters look exactly the way I wanted them to. But you got a fashion system that you can set up that makes sure that you always look a very specific way without affecting your gear. So that was really cool, and you're able to get a hold of and use that from the very, very beginning, which I really, really liked. As for the storylines themselves, I think my favorite part of the whole storylines existing in the first place, where they did a really good job of what I like to call crossover, continuity in the world itself. Playing the Sith Warrior, I had a really, really awesome feeling going through dealing with my entire process. When I played the Sith Warrior, I ended up playing my assassin afterwards. They talk about the assassin dealing with all their stuff, and then going for, of course, I'm not saying anything specific because I don't want to spoil anything for people who want to play it on their own. But then going through further into the story, I get around to my operative, and my operative, they specifically mentioned that there are issues with other members of the Dark Council, and then mentioning by name the masters of my other 2 characters, Darth Barris being the Sith Warrior, and dealing with Darth Thanaton for the Sith Assassin. So it's kind of cool to even think about that there's all this crossover and continuity. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that because my character is dealing with this right now, or I remember that because this other character is dealing with this right now. To go even further, there are moments in, like, let's say, the Republic side characters, my Jedi Knight had a moment with one of his companions where he literally called the companion of one of my other characters, and that companion showed up on my ship and actually had interactions with that character itself. So the continuity and the crossover is really, really cool in my opinion. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. And they even talk about things that one of your characters did that caused issues for another character. So it's super cool to play all the storylines, to see all the crossover back and forth. even something as small as companions conversating with each other. And let's even kind of build on that when we go into companions. All the companions have their own storylines. They're not very long. Some companion storylines are longer than others, but if you're someone who likes to enjoy the lore or get attached to your characters or even their companions, you can see quite a bit about them. Some are more boring than others, some are kind of funny, some are actually super awesome, and some you're going to hate with a fiery passion just because they're an annoying character and you want to punch them in the face every time they speak. That's right, Skage, I'm talking about you. I hated you on my bounty hunter side, and if I could just have 2 Blitzes, I would absolutely have them. Jawa or not, Blitz is a dope companion, I love him. And you're probably thinking, why bother getting in with the companion things that sort, but they actually do kind of branch further out. In later storylines and expansions, the companions have more that they add to the base storyline itself, and that's actually something I'm working on at the moment. I've played through all the expansions except for the most recent ones, the Knights of the Fallen Empire and the Knights of the Eternal Empire, I believe is the ones I'm working on at the moment. But I've played through everything else, and some of the companions do still interact with some stuff that's going on, apparently really in depth in the Fallen Empire and Eternal Empire stuff. So I'm gonna get really into that and enjoy that quite a bit, but we haven't gotten through that stuff yet. I just wanted to do the base stuff and level up a character and gear them up in PvP and that sort of stuff. So that's what I've been doing now, and it's actually quite a bit of fun. Now we do have to talk about a few of the downsides, and these are not game breaking for me, but they were something that were a bit of annoyance. Crew skills, or basically the crafting in the game itself. I'm unfortunately spoiled for crafting and gathering in games because I've played Final Fantasy XIV, and there is no game that reaches what Final Fantasy XIV does when it comes to crafting and gathering. Even the boring sides of crafting and gathering in Final Fantasy XIV are more than most games put into their crafting and gathering in a whole, and it's even as far as Star Wars is concerned. Unfortunately, it's very much set it and forget it. Just do this thing and then get it done. Let your companions take care of it. Some annoyances come in where your companions actually are doing some of your crew skills for you, meaning that you can't use them at that time. So you have to be very careful about when you send them out to do certain things, or using specific companions instead. There was also a process of leveling them up with the influence level. Their influence level did actually play a part with how they were with crew skills and how strong the companions were, so it was actually really important to level up your companions. But I mostly found this to be something that I just used as a money sink, where I found the best way to just purchase the items I needed to increase their influence level and then just push one companion up to max and the other one's up to a reasonable amount to be able to do my crew skills for me until I wanted to push them up even higher. And you're probably thinking, well, you didn't have to do that, and honestly I really wanted to, primarily making one companion to max because I didn't want my leveling process to be the easiest thing in the world, so I purposely chose to not make my companion be a healer at all. They were actually DPS at all times, and I was a DPS as well, forcing me into using pretty much as much of my kit as possible, if not all of it in some cases, to survive. I guess we can use it as a point to transition into to talk about companions being able to perform all roles. Essentially, you were able to right click on your companion and tell it to do whichever role you wanted it to. So if you were leveling as a healer, you can make them a DPS. If you're leveling as a tank, you can make them a healer if you wanted to. If you're leveling as a DPS, you can make them a healer or a tank. It's up to you. Again, I personally decided to make all of my companions DPS at all times. Reason for it was story content was never meant to be difficult. It was meant to something you could just go through, and I wanted it to be a little bit more difficult and force me to use more of my cooldowns. Especially since I wanted to get into PvP later, I wanted to make sure that I knew what these buttons were, how I was using them, what I wanted to do with them, so on and so forth. And using the proper buttons at the right time really did save my life, and sometimes I got absolutely blasted for not using the right buttons at the right time. I know from my own personal experience, gathering information or consuming content for Star Wars on YouTube, people who are a bit newer to the game just not using any of their buttons they have available to them, or just kind of flailing about, or you kind of think to yourself, man, do they even really read them? But to be honest, I don't really blame a lot of people because it doesn't really challenge them to the point where they absolutely have to. I had to find a way to tell myself this is going to be more challenging and then put that into play to then make myself better at the game itself. Now granted, it's like a smidge better, not like I'm fantastically better at the game itself, but I just know what my buttons do now, and I know how to somewhat use them. At least, starting out, I have a better perspective. And this last point is more towards the end game of SWTOR. It kind of suffers from its own success in a way that I personally believe, where the gearing system is actually so much more straightforward and a bit easier, to the point where I don't see a point in actually ever touching raid content outside of getting, achievements or mounts. Which could be a great reason to do it, but there's no specific raid gear that I've been able to find. Apparently there are some raid set bonuses, but apparently you can get those set bonuses from a specific NPC in game as well with just a bit of luck. So there's really no reason to touch raiding content, which is a little sad in my opinion, especially as someone who raids in other games. So I think there should be a bit of balance that happens there. You basically get all of your PvP gear from not even touching PvP as well. That's another issue I found, where you're farming more or less 1 or 2 flashpoints to get all of the currency you absolutely need to get the gear you want to use in PvP, which made it easier, don't get me wrong, and I was able to get geared up pretty quickly, but I can see how that would be boring after, you know, your 3rd or 4th character. Though I will give it some credit, after you get 1 character geared up, it's substantially easier to get the other ones geared up or caught up. It's just getting your set bonuses that become a bit more difficult at that time. I guess I should go ahead and wrap things up here because this video is already actually it's 20 minutes now, crud. But overall, my experience when it came to Star Wars The Old Republic, the game was actually a lot of fun. I've been enjoying it, and I probably will continue to enjoy it even after finishing out this video. It really wasn't, you know, playing it to make this video itself. I just tend to make videos about whatever I'm doing at the time, so I figured I'd let you guys know what my experience was and how I enjoyed it. If you're looking for an MMO to play, from a story perspective, the game is fantastic. It has hundreds and hundreds of hours to experience for a very, very small fee. Even as far as free, you have tons of things to experience. I would highly recommend at least putting in the cost to subscribe for 1 month. I think that's definitely worth its time. But just experiencing all the free content, you'd have so much to do and so much to experience and actually have a really, really good time. Even playing with friends, not even just playing alone. Though I will say at endgame, the game does need a little bit more balancing. As far as the class balance goes, it's actually pretty solid from what I've seen in most other games. But I would say the activity balance does need a little bit of work. PvP versus PvE, though not having divides between those two, having a bit, you know, across the board, basically making players do both of them is definitely very important in my opinion for the growth of the game itself. But I mean, there's not a lot of what's I'm looking for population in the game itself. So maybe bringing the community a bit closer together, possibly looking at a server squish, though that would be kind of, you know, negative for the free-to-play perspective, since free-to-play is limited on the number of characters they can have on a server. It would still be, I think, beneficial for the community overall with getting more people together to, you know, complete more stuff overall. I know that right now the community is a little bit spread across some of the servers, and expecting your friends to pay to just transfer your characters over when it's about $10 per character can be a bit expensive. I think it's actually closer to like 7, but you get the idea. All in all, the game's fun. Anyone who has time to kill, I recommend it to them. Get your chance, play it now. There's actually an expansion coming out, apparently holiday season, so right around the time that the game originally released, so I imagine probably in December at some point. And while we've got some downtime from other games, it's not a bad idea to jump into this one, experience and enjoy it. You don't have to play everything, but play what you like, and then when you're done, you're done. Now, as we all know, I can ramble on forever. I'm going to go ahead and cut it here. If you guys have any questions, feel free to toss them into the comments below. I'm still going to play this game on the side. I do enjoy it quite a bit, and I have an addiction when it comes to PvP, so I can't stay away from it in most cases. I've come back to this game a few times, and this is the one time I've come back to it like in a full force, so we'll have to see how things go from there. Shout out to you guys who stuck through all the way to the end of this video. It's a long one. I know it's a long one, longer than I wanted to be, but I had a lot to say about this game, and I was happy to say it. Toss in the comments if you made it all the way to the end, and I'll see you in the next video, guys. Take care. Peace out.